Hi, today we are in one of the safest places in Santa Clara, the Cyphort. Fengmin, who are you and what do you do?
Yes, I'm a co-founder and also the chief strategy and technology officer for Cyphort.
What's Cyphort?
So Cyphort, what we are really doing is we are offering the next generation advanced threat defense product. Think of it as a tool, but it's a tool that is helping the enterprise IT people to really implement this new thinking about the best way to defend against advanced threat. And with that new thinking, new approach, our tool is actually designed to best help people implementing that new approach.
When did you start this company and what did you do before?
The company was started in around March of 2011. And before that, I have been kind of did a few startup, and I'll go back a little bit, just give you an idea. After I finished my PhD from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri in US, I spent about 8 years on DARPA-funded research projects, and that is mostly working on high-speed networking and basically security. So for DARPA projects, you typically actually build a prototype, not like a National Science Foundation kind of project. You write papers. So that's that 8 years. I always think of it as a training for me. Once around year 2000, that's where we saw a few security startup, the early days of intrusion prevention or detection product. We realized that we have been doing much more advanced technology and building prototype under the DARPA project. We believe a much better technology and solution compared to some of the startup. So that's where I started having the initial idea of maybe I should create a startup. Actually, it's around that time then I got the first opportunity, first call to do a startup in Silicon Valley. So that's when I moved and started my first company called Introvert Networks. That is really an intrusion prevention product company. Followed by that company we basically got acquired by McAfee. So we went to McAfee and I worked there for a few years to help integrate that product into McAfee portfolio. But then I went to start up my second one, that is Palo Alto Networks, a next generation firewall, followed by also 2 years as a chief security content officer at FireEye. What I want to probably really point out, the main thing I think in this kind of path is always I try to keep up with what the security threats are going, where it's going, and how the IT infrastructure actually is evolving. Because the combination of those two really create or define new needs for tools for people to defend. So pretty much that's kind of my career, how it has evolved. And even coming to founding Cyphort is actually continuing on the same path and always trying to build the next best tool that the IT people can use.
Who are your customers?
For us, the customer really include all enterprise class company. The product is helping them to really protect the threats that either coming from external coming to their network, or some threats landed on their network actually moving laterally inside the network. It's not going to be industrial sector specific because that, as you know, today the kind of threat problem is applicable to every sector. Right. It's only mainly determined by how sophisticated, at what stage the enterprise actually understands the problem. So it's across the industry sectors.
And Fengmin, do you only help identifying a threat or are you also helping mitigate the threat?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We built the product to actually best support this new, I would call it a paradigm shift in terms of how do you deal with advanced threat. What we realized was really for enterprise, the bottleneck, if you will, in advanced threat defense is really with the ability to detect the threat reliably, cover all the vectors of potential threat propagation, and also provide a very actionable, relevant results for them to take action. And so that is where once we realize that is the main problem, so the Cyphort product is built, the focus is on accurate detection and covering all the bases. Make sure that you detect them, and also with very reliable and very relevant data to the enterprise under protection. But today what we don't do is we do not provide like a firewall function for it to do an enforcement. The reason we did and position the product this way is we realized that most of the enterprise already have one form or another, next generation firewall or some of the security web gateway, and they already made the investment. They have that product deployed, and those products are not doing the best defense for the enterprise because they do not know what data to use to actually make a blocking, for example. Okay. So if someone says, this is the kind of data you use to do that blocking, they can block it well. So we come in to fill that gap, and we want to provide that detection data.
So this means that your main focus is on the identification of the threat, and then you push this kind of information or the result of that, who is the threat, who is not, to the firewall, who will then say, okay, if this is a threat according to Cyphort, you won't be allowed in.
Correct. So that is actually that brings us to this second notion. We talk about this new paradigm shift, right? The notion people says you have to continuously monitor all the possible vectors, and then you try to determine what's exactly happened, what's relevant to your environment, at what stage the attack is going. And then with this very specific data, you want to turn it into actionable data. So what we end up doing is associated with this notion is the notion of a ecosystem-based defense approach. So that's where when Cyphort detects something from the day one, the product support a set of APIs. Yeah. So it basically allow any other product to consume the results in a fashion that is readily implementable for blocking something.
How do you define a threat? Is a spammer also including in the definition?
We would not consider the typical, like the email spam you think in the past, where someone is mainly, let's see, sending in email a lot of message just to kind of spread maybe some rumors, right? What we are focusing on is, think of malware pieces where maybe a piece of code, right, compared to the old days of the virus, now the advanced one come in, not only have a lot of attack payload, but also have a lot of capability to try to hide itself, and also have a lot of network-based communication, right, callback to the server. So that's where the malware is really the most lethal weapon, if you will, for the modern threat, right? And so the malware is really the focus. And then anything associated with that. So you mentioned the email, although the spamming is not the focus, but email as a vector for the malware to get into the enterprise to infect someone's machine. So we also cover the email. We make sure we are able to extract the files and then inspect them to actually detect them as well.
I mean, you have two sides of the equation. You have on one side the attackers, and you have on the other hand like something like Cyphort, who is defending the company. And there's always this kind of competition. Yeah, one time the attackers are front running, and sometimes the defenders. How do you keep up with the speed that the attackers are developing? Because they're using different strategies to enter in there. How do you keep up to date?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and this is indeed a challenge. For us, one of the fundamental component in our detection technology is, in addition to use, people are all aware of this notion of sandboxing, right? Sandboxing is really used for be able to detonate or run a piece of code and based on behavior try to determine if it's malicious or not. Now, just using the sandbox to detonate it may not allow you to adapt and to cope with the new ones. But that's how the kind of the old generation of the product typically implement a set of specific rules or look for pattern. You write if then else kind of pattern or heuristics, try to then determine if a piece of code is malicious or not. But for Cyphort, one of the things from day one we realized what we need to do is to marry this detonation behavior-based with machine learning. And so the machine learning allow us to do two things. Number one is indeed, even for a piece of malware, we already seen it's something maybe just happened, but by looking at the behavior of that and relying on the machine learning model to train and then build a more sophisticated mathematical model to predict to generalize into the class of malware that have a similar behavior, but it's not the same thing. So we are able to detect that. And that give us the ability to detect unknown, or you can also refer to as a 0 day from a malware perspective. Then the second thing that the machine learning allow us to do is once we have this systematic architecture, then if we are able to continuously monitor, use additional means to collect new samples and to do the training periodically, and then release the new model into the product, now we have a continuous learning and adaptation. So of course to support the second part, what we have been able to do is, in addition to collaborating with a lot of other entities, the threat intelligence companies and also community-based feed out there, we also have built what we refer to as a crawler infrastructure in Cyphort Labs. What the crawler infrastructure allow us to do is to constantly go out, use our own hardware-based sandbox to go out to the wide internet and to get our sandbox infected. When that happens, and then we have the collection of the new exploit pack and new samples, and that feed into our machine learning. So that's really at least a main part of our approach, how to keep up.
And this is also where my question relates to. Totally understand if you have lots of users and you get lots of data, then you can improve your machine learning algorithm for detecting those threats. But when you started out, you did not have that much of customer behavior data.
Right.
How did you convince the first customers to say, yes, I go with Cyphort, without you having that much data which machine learning algorithm can apply to?
Right. Of course, there are two parts to it. One part is indeed we need to leverage some existing collection of malware samples, and luckily, with both some of the partners and also, one of the well-known one you probably are aware is VirusTotal, and it probably have the largest collection of the malware samples. So by using the existing samples, we are able to learn a model fairly recent. So that's from the technical part. But then when it comes to engaging the customer, really, I would say a few big steps that we have taken. Number one is indeed really be able to identify the key problem the customer is facing, and also showing that we understand the customer's problem, and also have a common understanding of the best approach to actually improve their defense. Once we have that conversation, then the next thing is we share how we build this product or the tool, how that tool would support this understanding of how to approach it. And once we have that, really the third step is basically almost all enterprise customer would require that, and we actually make the product available and for them to actually test drive it. So they would actually go through an evaluation on their network. Of course, in that process, we provide as much help to get them through the hurdle where they typically are always like resource limited. So we help them make it easy for them to install it on the live network and go through a evaluation period. So we're able to approach the customer that way, and we're happy with what we have been able to do so far. Yeah.
Fengmin, how do you show the customer that whether there's some malware? For example, if I'm looking at a company and the emails they are getting, and what I understood is that you are also scanning some kind of files, whether there's malware included or not. Yeah? So for minimizing that the system is breached. How do you do this in minimal? Is it just that you have some kind of bar which says, okay, 95% chance there's malware included, or do you just, if there's a specific threshold, the email doesn't go through? What's the process?
Yeah, for us, actually in Cyphort product, we end up using multiple inspection methods we refer to, because we realized, for the modern attacks, the malware, they can come in different ways, and also they all have very sophisticated kind of evasive behavior in them. And some of them may evade a traditional virus scan, like a static analysis, right? You look at the code, how the code structure look like. And then the behavior-based one, some of them actually are able to detect if they are being watched in a sandbox. They may stop running. So what we end up doing is once we realize this, then whenever we get a piece of code that we feel this unknown, there could be a malware carrying file. And then we actually go through both static analysis for looking for known patterns, and also we have reputation data reference to VirusTotal, in addition to our own more kind of sophisticated static analysis and behavior. So in this case, what it means is when we decide if something is really bad, indeed there is typically a kind of a range of behavior, and you can almost think there is a threshold. Today, what we have done is intentionally not expose that kind of slider to the customer, but we are able to take into account of these multiple methods of inspection. Then we look at those information together. So for the machine learning, we actually come up with a score. The behavior-based score may range basically, from, let's say, from a 0 to 100, right? That kind of scale, and we choose a threshold based on our training, and also we in the future can allow customer to set based on how aggressive they are. But the interesting thing, it's helpful when we use both VirusTotal and static multiple kind of method, is if something is already known, because you expect, right? They don't always use something totally new, and there are a lot of them use some existing things. So that's the benefit of the product. If they use something that is not new, then additional method, including the VirusTotal, actually give us a context. And in that case, it's fairly black and white. And we can even tell them, says, what are the other product already believe this is bad, the same thing, and what the names they're referring them to. And then we can basically compare that with what our machine learning is telling us. So they both help us to kind of improve the machine learning. At the same time, we can tell the customer if something is already known, potentially how long ago they have been out there versus all the way to something really new. So that way, the customer, based on how aggressive they want to respond to this, they could choose different posture towards it. Yeah.
Fengmin, let's talk about the business model of Cyphort. how are you making money with it? Is it a SaaS model? Is it something like an installment fee?
Yes, that's a very good question, because we always have to make money. So in this particular case, the current model is we choose a software or virtual appliance-based delivery model, but it's a subscription-based. So we have seen a lot of customer, the subscription-based one gives them some flexibility, at the same time gives them a more like a steady kind of cadence for them to make the budget decisions. So the thing really, so far it worked the best for us is really the software-based delivery along with the support for virtualized environment. And in this case, the customer, we can be deployed both on-premise and also when they choose to, like we have customer where they already, most of their computing have gone to AWS. Yeah. And so in that case, they can actually deploy our product in the AWS environment as well. The way the product is designed really, because it's API-based and software-based delivery, so it allows it to be easily deployed, also provide the service in a SaaS model. So we are actually right now working on that based mainly on the customer demand. Because initial set of a customer, we definitely seen more customer want to have product deployed on-premise because there is still some concern about their data going out of their network.
Are you somehow differentiating the SaaS products and maybe based on volume or based on number of employees of the customer or some other metric?
Oh, the pricing model you are referring to. Yeah, right now actually all we have a pretty much a unified pricing model that is based on the protected bandwidth. So the notion is, let's see, if you have the total, you may have multiple links, network connection links you have to watch. So on that link, you know what is the typical amount of traffic is going through it. So then you purchase our product based on that expected amount of data that we have to inspect and then detect and protect. So actually that's also one thing that we have got very positive customer feedback. What end up happening is, let's say you purchase, let's say 5 gigabits worth of the traffic, and then the Cyphort product does not limit the customer how many link that you are monitoring. Maybe how many servers you deploy to monitor this link. So for them, that is very flexible because you may have multiple office and distributed across the globe, and then you don't have different pricing model. It's the total amount of protected link bandwidth.
Fengmin, how did you acquire the first customers, and did anything of the process for customer acquisition change over time?
Yes, and that's a very good question. The initial customer is really based on some of the connection. In this case, both the connection, let's see, with the executive team, and also the connection, for example, with our venture capital funding partner, right? That is a very typical practice. Yeah. It's more about initially with the connection, we have someone that is have a willing, open their ears to listen to us, and that is very important. But then quickly as the time goes, today we have a lot of customer. Now they are already coming through a very typical funnel. You think of that process from, you have mind share, you have lead generation. So that means now it become a at scale operation, because those customer, because they know they have heard about Cyphort and they have a problem, then they see Cyphort as a potential contender for that, then that's how now it comes in. Today, our customer, both from that kind of normal channel, at the same time, they are become like much larger customer compared to the early set.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is it mainly driven currently by inbound marketing, or is it also that you have a direct sales force which goes out and meets potential clients and then tries to acquire them?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have, Cyphort have a very, I think maybe very interesting. Initially we thought, wow, we were so happy we were doing so well. As you imagine, most of the enterprise company, the product, you always rely on initially a direct sales force to go after the account. But then for Cyphort, as actually even early this year, we already have several dozen partners. So this
distribution partners.
Correct,
Yeah.
and these are the ones. So it's very rare in my past, right, several companies. At this early stage, we have so many partners and signed with us, and actually today, we definitely have over 50% of our deals directly coming through the partner source versus
Right.
our direct sales.
And can you describe those kind of partners? So are this more some kind of antivirus or firewall programs, or are this consulting companies, or what type of companies?
Yeah, actually, one example I would mention is this company called Optiv. So they used to be, there are two companies. One is called Fishnet, the other one is called Accuvon. These are the company that they have their own labs. They also have their own, of course, sales engineer and the whole workforce from the marketing all the way to product. So they typically help the customer define, a set of solutions for their security protection needs. So these are really major players, and they help both for getting the customer and also, of course, some of the training and support installation also coming from them. So those two companies actually a few months ago they merged. So that they merged, they become Optiv, and we are one of the very select few small set of partners that they have.
Cool.
Yeah.
Over the last 4 years, what have been the major obstacles while building and growing Cyphort? And how did you manage those obstacles?
And I think for us, the main things are all related to scaling up the sales. And this is where, of course, one of the things we learned is, for instance, the kind of product that we are indeed, it's advanced threat defense product. So if you compare to the old generation of some of the security product, they are more complex, and that means going to the enterprise, there are more dependencies with other product, and also there is the education of the customer aspect. So we have basically at the same time not only help to educate the customer for their adoption of the newer approach, the better approach for defense, at the same time to basically improve the product, because you always scale from smaller customer and the key features then to more mature at scale features, and for kind of what we refer to as like enterprise readiness. It's really talking about more deployment scenarios and more other product to integrate with, and also to account for different kind of IT configuration. So most of our work has been along these lines, along with scaling up the sales force. That's the main challenge in the last few months.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. We always try to help first-time entrepreneurs make less errors. What type of lessons have you learned over the last 10 years maybe, and some kind of lessons that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, a few things definitely, I think, come off the top of my head, and I see more entrepreneurs still having this issue. Number one, I would say, and also, coming from a technical background myself, is really for them to avoid falling in love with their technology. And they always think their technology is the best, can solve everything. So that is where they tend to forget about the customer side, because oftentimes you have to have a direct connection to the customer pain and the problem. So that is one thing happen a lot with entrepreneurs. And of course, the next one is more speaking to related to the product ease of use, ease of deployment. And for people with an engineering or technology background, they always think, this is so easy for me. But then you have to basically put yourself in customers' shoes, right? In that case, maybe it's not that easy. You have to make it easy for the customer. And then the third one, I would say it happens a lot with the first-time entrepreneur is they always are eager to present a big solution. So I refer to as maybe the tendency to boil the ocean, where if indeed you have a good idea, you should solve the most urgent problem with that one or two feature, and you should show customer traction, and then you can move on. So that is a mistake they make. Oftentimes also would give, for example, the venture capitalists the impression that they really don't understand, they lack the focus. So those are some of the main things. Of course, when it comes to the team and then culture, there are some things I feel it's also very important, because being a startup company in general, maintain a very innovative culture is probably the utmost for the team efficiency and everything else. So that's sometimes the founders, and they have to balance it out. When you look for people with big company experience, hopefully, they leave most of the big company operation culture behind, right? That will be one interesting thing to watch out for.
And how do you check whether somebody is fitting into a startup based on the innovative culture?
I think this is where, for instance, one example is certain developers or technical people, they are very strong, but then they may be always, their thinking is always says, you give me, as specific a task as possible for me to perform, then I just deliver to that. So versus someone says, I just want to understand, what we are trying to build. What is this supposed to do? And that's our goal, our objective. And then they actually can think about the best way to do it. Versus, you have everything spec'd out, says, exactly you implement this way, that way. So that will be very fundamental. Some people are very comfortable in working in one mode versus the other. And for startup, typically you would want to look for people have a little experience and also are willing, open to share and not to hesitate, right? To say, okay, this is a better way to do it. That would be a good way to look at people. Yeah.
Okay. Fengmin, thank you so much for your time and for
Thank
sharing
you.
your knowledge.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Sure. And next time, if you are having a really big website, and you are thinking about threats that are maybe coming at your company, just look at Cyphort. Maybe there's a good solution for protecting your website.
Thank you.
Welcome.
My pleasure to share the thoughts.
Thanks.